Imagine being summoned to the wedding of the year not to celebrate, but to serve as a living target for the bride's amusement. For Stella, a struggling foreign student in Seoul, this invitation was a command she could not refuse without risking her visa. She stood alone in the center of the Schiller Hotel's grand ballroom, a stark contrast in her rough blue uniform against the sea of silk and tuxedos. Rahana, the heiress in the diamond-encrusted tiara, deliberately tipped her glass, watching the red wine bleed across the pristine white marble. The room fell silent, the air heavy with the scent of lilies and the weight of 300 judgmental stares. Hana pointed to the stain, demanding Stella scrub it on her knees while the wealthy guests watched with amused detachment. But just as Stella prepared to lower herself to the ground, the atmosphere shifted violently. The heavy double doors slammed open, freezing the bride's laughter in her throat. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out of the shadows, and suddenly the most powerful people in Korea looked terrified. The game was about to change. Before we continuing this thrilling story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Where are you watching from? Like, comment and share. 48 hours before the red wine stained the marble floor, the neon pulse of Seoul was already beating against Stella's temples. The air in Gangnam was heavy, a suffocating blanket of humidity and exhaust fumes that clung to her skin. Above, the city burned with electric light, Hangul characters flashing in aggressive pinks and blues, reflecting off the wet pavement like spilled oil. Stella kept her head down, chin tucked into her scarf, navigating the crowded sidewalk with the practiced efficiency of someone trying to disappear. The sharp, spicy scent of tteokbokki drifted from a street stall, mixing with the sweet, caramelized aroma of hotteok. Stella's stomach twisted, a hollow ache reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning to save the bus fare. She gripped the strap of her worn backpack tighter, forcing her legs to move past the steam rising from the griddles. In this city, hunger was just another noise she had to tune out. But she couldn't tune out the eyes, they were a physical weight. As she moved through the throng of commuters, the crowd parted around her, not with the respect given to elders but with the hesitation of people encountering an anomaly. Stella felt the lingering glances at her hair, the hushed whispers behind cupped hands, and the way mothers pulled their children slightly closer. To them, she wasn't a student or a person, she was a foreign object, a glitch in the homogeneous rhythm of the city. She slipped into the service entrance of the Schiller Hotel, the heavy steel door cutting off the chaotic noise of the street. The transition was instant. The air here was recycled and cold, smelling faintly of lemon polish and industrial starch. Stella changed into her uniform in silence, the stiff blue fabric scratching against her skin, and tied the white apron that marked her place in the hierarchy. Her assignment was the royal suite on the penthouse floor. It was a space designed for masters of the universe, smelling of imported leather, cedar smoke and old money. Stella moved through the room like a phantom, wiping down mahogany surfaces that cost more than her family's entire home back across the ocean. She polished the gold faucets until they distorted her reflection, erasing the fatigue from her dark eyes. The goal was always the same: leave no trace. She fluffed the pillows, aligned the crystal tumblers and backed out of the room, ensuring her footprints were vacuumed away as she went. In this world, the perfect cleaner was a ghost, unseen, unheard and utterly forgotten. Stella believed that if she stayed quiet enough, the city wouldn't chew her up. She didn't know that the silence she cultivated was about to be broken. The silence of the royal suite was not broken by a knock, but by the sharp, rhythmic impact of designer heels against the marble foyer. It sounded like a countdown. Rahana swept into the room, the temperature seeming to drop the moment she crossed the threshold. She was a vision of manufactured perfection, skin like porcelain, hair like spilled ink, and a white structured dress that cost more than Stella's entire tuition. But her beauty was sharp, the kind that cut if one got too close. She didn't look at Stella. She looked through her, scanning the room as if searching for a flaw in a diamond. Stella froze, clutching the microfiber cloth like a shield against her chest. She lowered her gaze, the proper etiquette for the invisible. Hana stopped at the mahogany console table Stella had just polished to a mirror shine. The wood was flawless, reflecting the crystal chandelier above like a dark pool of water. Hana ran a manicured finger along the surface, slow and deliberate. She examined her fingertip. There was nothing there, not a speck of dust. But Hana clicked her tongue, a sound of exaggerated disappointment that echoed in the quiet room. "Filthy," she whispered, the word hanging in the air like smoke. She turned her cold gaze to Stella, her eyes devoid of warmth or recognition. "Is this how they teach you to clean in your country, or is it just laziness?" The injustice burned in Stella's throat. She wanted to point out the reflection in the wood, clear enough to see the cruelty in Hana's face. She wanted to say that she had scrubbed until her fingers ached, but the threat of the immigration office, the precariousness of her visa, and the weight of her unpaid bills clamped a hand over her mouth. Survival required silence. It required swallowing the truth until it choked her. Stella bowed her head, making herself smaller, shrinking into the role of the submissive help that Hana demanded. "I apologize, Miss Ra," Stella said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I will do it again." The words tasted like ash. Hana smiled, a thin, cruel curving of lips that didn't reach her eyes. She had won the little game. She had confirmed that Stella was not a person to be respected, but a thing to be stepped on. "See that you do," Hana said, wiping her clean finger on a napkin and dropping it to the floor for Stella to retrieve. "And don't let me see you when I come back. I hate clutter." The service corridor was usually a sanctuary of silence at 2 in the morning, a long stretch of beige carpet where Stella could finally drop the tension from her shoulders. But tonight, the air felt charged, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that pricked the back of her neck. She heard them before she saw them, the rhythmic, synchronized thud of heavy leather soles against the floor, moving with the precision of a hunting pack. It wasn't the erratic stumble of drunk wedding guests. This was the sound of absolute authority. Stella instinctively pressed herself flat against the wall, pulling her cleaning cart in tight to make her silhouette as narrow as possible. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open, and a phalanx of men in black suits poured out. They moved like a single organism, scanning the hallway with earpieces glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of this dark formation walked a man who seemed to absorb the fluorescence around him. Son Min-Gyu did not walk like a guest. He walked like the architect of the building. He was taller than the men guarding him, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke suit that cost more than the hotel's annual payroll. He was speaking in Korean, his voice a low, resonant baritone that barely rose above a whisper, yet it carried a terrifying weight in the narrow hall. "If the ledger is light," Min-Gyu murmured, his tone devoid of anger but rich with a promise of violence, "burn the archive, and the hand that holds the pen." As the group swept past, Stella held her breath, staring at the floor, counting the seconds until she could exhale. But the footsteps slowed. The air pressure in the hallway seemed to drop. Stella felt a gaze on her, heavy and physical, like a hand gripping her shoulder. Against her better judgment, against the survival instinct that told her to remain invisible, she looked up. She found herself locked in the sights of the Dragon of Seoul. Min-Gyu had slowed his pace, his head turned slightly, his dark eyes fixed on her. There was no confusion in his expression, only a sharp, predatory intelligence. He wasn't looking at her uniform or the cleaning cart. He was looking directly into her eyes, stripping away the layers of invisibility she had carefully constructed. It was an electric shock, a sudden, violent recognition that sent a shiver racing down her spine. He didn't blink, he didn't scoff. He just watched, assessing her presence in his world with a terrifying intensity. Overwhelmed by the voltage of a man who looked at her as if she were a riddle to be solved rather than furniture to be ignored, Stella's nerve broke. She looked down, breaking the connection, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The footsteps resumed, and the shadow passed, leaving her trembling in the sudden cold. The staff locker room was supposed to be the one place where the hierarchy of the hotel couldn't reach. It smelled of industrial bleach and tired bodies, a stark difference from the lavender-scented air of the guest floors. But when the metal door swung open, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Hana stood in the doorway, her presence as out of place as a diamond in a gutter. She scanned the rows of grey lockers with undisguised disgust until her eyes landed on Stella. Stella froze, one arm halfway through the sleeve of her street jacket. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Guests never came down here, not ever. "You," Hana said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. It wasn't a greeting, it was a summons. She didn't wait for an answer. She stepped inside, the click of her heels sounding like gunshots in the small space. "My personal attendant has decided to be inconveniently ill. She's vomiting in the servants' quarters. I need a replacement for the wedding reception." Stella's stomach dropped. "Miss Ra, I am just a cleaner. I am not trained for personal service. The agency." "The agency," Hana cut her off with a laugh that was sharp and brittle. She took a step closer, invading Stella's personal space until the scent of expensive champagne drowned out the bleach. "Do you think I care about agency protocols? I've seen your file, Stella." The use of her name sent a cold spike of fear through Stella's veins. She hadn't told the bride her name. "Student visa D2, Hana recited, her eyes gleaming with malice. Strictly limited to 20 hours of work per week, but looking at the logbooks, you've been clocking nearly 50, haven't you, under the table, to pay for your tuition. The air left Stella's lungs. If immigration found out, she wouldn't just be fired, she would be deported. Her degree, her future, everything she had suffered for would be gone in a single stamp of a government official's ink. Hana saw the terror in Stella's eyes and smiled. It was the smile of a cat that had cornered a mouse. It would be such a shame if the immigration office received an anonymous tip about the Schiller Hotel hiring illegal labor. They'd raid the place. You'd be on a plane by morning. She reached out and smoothed the collar of Stella's cheap jacket, a gesture of mock affection that made Stella's skin crawl. But I'm a generous woman. Be my attendant for the wedding. Do exactly as I say when I say it, and I'll forget I ever saw those logbooks. Stella looked at the exit, then back at the heiress. The locker room felt smaller, the walls closing in. She was trapped in a cage made of gold and blackmail. She nodded slowly. Good, Hana whispered. Don't be late, and Stella, wear something durable. Stella fled to the sub-basement laundry room, the only place in the hotel that felt safe. It was a world of steam and starch, ruled by the ajumas, the older Korean women with permed hair and backs bent from decades of scrubbing floors. They were the invisible engine of the hotel, and they were the closest thing Stella had to family in this cold city. But when she told them what Hana had demanded, her service in exchange for her silence, the rhythmic hiss of the steam presses stopped dead. Mrs. Ranhai, the head housekeeper who usually slipped Stella extra kimbap during the lunch rush, didn't tell her to be brave. She didn't tell her it would be okay. She grabbed Stella's wrist, her calloused fingers digging into the skin with a desperation that chilled the younger woman to the bone. Her eyes, usually warm, were wide with fear. Don't go, Stella, she whispered, her voice trembling. Call in sick, run away, do anything but walk into that ballroom. She can't, Stella choked out, the threat of deportation looming like a guillotine. She knows about the visa. Mrs. Ranhai's face crumbled into pity. She looked at the other women who were shaking their heads, murmuring in hushed, terrified tones. You don't understand, she said, pulling Stella closer so no one else could hear. That family, and the guests they invite, they don't just use people like us, they eat us. They will chew you up just to see if you break, and they will laugh while they do it. The air in the laundry room grew heavy, the steam turning suffocating. The women weren't just afraid of the bride's cruelty, they were terrified of something else. They began to whisper a name Stella hadn't heard before, glancing at the heavy metal door as if the devil himself might walk through it. The list, one of the younger women murmured, clutching a rosary hidden beneath her apron. I saw the seating chart, he is coming. The dragon, Mrs. Ranhai breathed, the blood draining from her face. Son Min-Gyu, if he is there, child, you must be invisible. He is not like the others. He doesn't play games, he ends them. Even the bride's father trembles when he walks into a room. She squeezed Stella's hand one last time. If the dragon sees you, pray he is not hungry. The dressing room was a storm of silk, tulle and panic, but when Hana entered, the chaos instantly organized itself around her. She was already in her gown, a breathtaking architectural marvel of lace and pearls that likely cost more than the entire village Stella grew up in. She looked like a queen, radiant and terrifying. In her hand she held a garment bag. She didn't hand it to Stella, she let it drop to the floor at the cleaner's feet like trash. Put it on, Hana commanded, turning back to the mirror to adjust her diamond earrings. And be quick, the guests are arriving. Stella unzipped the bag, expecting the crisp black and white uniform of the hotel staff, dignified, invisible, professional. Instead, she pulled out something that made her stomach turn. It was a dress, but it was a caricature. The fabric was cheap, shiny polyester in a jarring, electric blue that would scream for attention against the muted, elegant creams and golds of the wedding decor. It came with a stiff, oversized white apron and a lace headpiece that looked like something from a bad period drama. Miss Ra, Stella stammered, holding up the scratchy fabric. This isn't the hotel standard, it's what I chose, the bride interrupted, her reflection catching Stella's eye in the glass. Her smile was razor-sharp. You are not hotel staff today, Stella, you are my staff, and I want everyone to know exactly who serves whom. I want the distinction to be visual. Stella had no choice. She went behind the changing screen, her hands trembling as she stripped off her comfortable clothes. The dress was a size too small. The zipper bit into her skin, restricting her breathing, forcing her to stand with a rigid, unnatural posture. The skirt was hemmed awkwardly, neither long nor short, just wrong. When she tied the apron strings, they dug into her waist. She stepped out, feeling exposed despite being fully covered. The fabric rustled loudly with every movement, a sound designed to announce her presence like a leper's bell. Stella looked in the full-length mirror and saw exactly what Hana intended. Beside the bride's elegance, Stella looked ridiculous, cheap, a clown in a palace. Hana turned, her eyes sweeping over the cleaner with malicious delight. She reached out and adjusted the lace on Stella's head, pinning it painfully tight against her scalp. "Perfect," Hana whispered, stepping back to admire her work. "Now no one will mistake you for one of us. Go stand by the entrance, and try not to breathe too loudly." The dynasty hall smelled of money and suffocating lilies. Thousands of white blooms cascaded from the ceiling, their fragrance so thick it felt less like a celebration and more like a state funeral. Underneath the floral sweetness lay the sharper, metallic tang of expensive champagne and the musk of perfumes that lingered in the air like invisible smoke. Stella walked 3 paces behind Rahana, her hands gripping the heavy embroidered silk of the bride's train. The fabric was cool and slippery, a stark contrast to the scratchy electric blue polyester digging into Stella's own skin. Every step was a choreographed humiliation. Hana moved with the grace of a swan, gliding across the polished marble, while Stella shuffled behind her, the oversized white apron rustling loudly in the hushed reverence of the room. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns, a fortress of wealth where outsiders were usually invisible. But today, the cleaner was designed to be seen. As they passed the round tables, the murmur of polite conversation died down, replaced by the soft, rhythmic clinking of silver against china. Eyes followed them, not admiring the bride, but darting to the jarring blue figure trailing her. Stella felt their gazes like physical touches, sliding over her skin, analyzing the foreign texture of her hair, the darkness of her complexion against the pristine white of the wedding dress. "Look," a woman whispered near the aisle, hiding her mouth behind a fan made of ostrich feathers. "Is that the help? Why is she dressed like a cartoon?" "It's a statement," a man replied, his voice low and amused, swirling his whiskey. Hana always did have a twisted sense of humor. She brought a court jester. Stella kept her eyes fixed on the intricate lace of Hana's back, counting the pearls stitched into the fabric to keep from screaming. 1, 2, 3, breathe, 4, 5, 6, don't trip. If she marred this performance in any way, her life and career was over. The chandelier above, a monstrosity of glass and light, seemed to vibrate with the tension in the room. She was a stain on their perfect picture, a prop brought in to make the bride look purer, whiter and richer by comparison. As they reached the head table, Hana stopped abruptly. Stella froze, nearly colliding with her. The bride didn't turn around. She just flicked her wrist, a silent, imperious command for Stella to arrange the train at her feet. Stella knelt, the marble cold against her knees, and for a moment the entire room seemed to hold its breath, watching the foreign cleaning lady bow before the queen. When Stella stood up and retreated to the corner, she felt small, ridiculous, and utterly alone in a room full of people. The reception was a minefield of crystal and social landmines. Stella stood stiffly behind the bride's chair, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron to stop them from shaking. The air was thick with the smell of roasted duck and truffle oil, a rich, cloying scent that made her empty stomach churn. Hana held court at the center table, laughing with her mouth open, accepting compliments like tides. Then the music shifted. Hana stood up to greet a senator's wife, and Stella instinctively reached out to adjust the heavy train of the gown to prevent the bride from stumbling. It was a reflex, a movement born of the terrified obedience she had practiced all week. "Don't," Hana shrieked, spinning around so fast the movement whipped her veil through the air. The ballroom went dead silent. The string quartet faltered. Hana looked down at Stella's hands, hovering inches from the white silk, and curled her lip in exaggerated horror. "Don't touch it with those hands," she announced, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "You'll leave grease marks. Do you have any idea how much French lace costs? It's worth more than your life." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. It wasn't genuine mirth, it was the sound of people relieved they weren't the target. The guests swirled their wine, exchanging amused glances. The help, their eyes said, so clumsy, so out of place. Stella felt the heat rise up her neck, burning her cheeks. She pulled her hands back as if she had touched a hot stove. I am sorry, Miss Ra, I was only—" "You were only being clumsy," Hana snapped, brushing the imaginary dust off her hip. "Stand back, further back, you're ruining the aesthetic." Stella took a step back, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. She looked away from the bride, desperately searching for a shadow to disappear into, anything to break the weight of 300 pairs of eyes. That was when she found him. In the far corner of the room, separated from the jovial crowd by a velvet rope and a wall of terrified waiters, sat son Min-Gyu. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't talking. He was sitting alone at a table meant for 6, draped in shadow. He held a tumbler of amber whiskey in one hand, the crystal catching the dim light. While the rest of the room looked at Stella with amusement or pity, Min-Gyu looked at her with something else entirely. Recognition. His dark eyes were locked onto her face, unblinking, dissecting the scene with a cold, terrifying precision. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never wavering. It felt like a tether, a physical line drawn across the ballroom, connecting the girl in the ridiculous blue dress to the most dangerous man in Seoul. For a heartbeat, the laughter of the crowd faded into white noise. It was just the dragon and the cleaning lady, and in his eyes, Stella saw a storm gathering. The shift in the room was gravitational. When son Min-Gyu rose from his shadowed corner, the ambient chatter of the ballroom didn't just fade, it was extinguished. He moved through the crowd not like a guest, but like a shark cutting through water, the sea of tuxedos parting instinctively to clear his path. He held his whiskey glass loosely, his pace unhurried, yet the air around the bridal table grew thin, sucking the oxygen out of the celebration. Stella, standing rigid behind the bride's chair, felt the hair on her arms stand up. She watched the groom, a man who usually carried himself with the arrogance of a political heir, suddenly pale. He gripped his napkin as if it were a lifeline, his knuckles turning white. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a stammering greeting to the man who held the lien on his family's future, but Min-Gyu didn't even grant him the dignity of a glance. The dragon of Seoul walked right past the groom, as if he were an empty chair. Min-Gyu stopped directly in front of Rahana. The bride, blinded by her own spotlight and the champagne, didn't see the danger. She saw only a powerful man coming to pay homage to her beauty. She tilted her chin up, her smile practiced and expectant, waiting for the compliment she believed she was owed. "Director son," Hana purred, her voice dripping with full sweetness. "You honor us. I trust the reception meets your exacting standards." Min-Gyu swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his dark eyes sliding over her lace gown before flicking, for a fraction of a second, to Stella standing in the ridiculous blue uniform behind her. "It is certainly educational," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble that carried a razor's edge. "I have always admired your commitment to authenticity, Miss Ra." Hana preened, touching her diamond necklace. "I only accept the best." "Indeed," Min-Gyu continued, stepping closer, his presence looming over the table. "Most brides are content to simply shine, but you understand that for a diamond to truly sparkle it requires a backdrop of dirt. It takes a rare sort of confidence to parade your nature so openly." Hana laughed, a tinkling, delighted sound, taking the words as praise for her boldness in staging the contrast with the cleaning lady. She thought he was calling her a diamond, but Stella, watching from the periphery, felt a jolt of shock. She heard the second meaning loud and clear. He wasn't calling Hana a diamond, he was calling her cruel. He was mocking her need to humiliate someone else just to feel superior. "You are too kind," Hana said, oblivious to the insult wrapped in silk. "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Min-Gyu replied, his eyes finally drifting past the bride to lock onto Stella's terrified gaze. "I am simply an observer of value, and I see exactly what everything in this room is worth." The reception had blurred into a dizzying montage of toasts and forced applause, the air growing thick with the heat of 300 bodies and the cloying scent of wilting lilies. Stella stood by the service station, her legs trembling from hours in the ill-fitting shoes, watching Rahana sway in the center of the room. The bride was drunk, not just on the vintage champagne flowing like water, but on the heady rush of being the absolute center of the universe. Hana held a heavy bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, a 1982 vintage worth more than Stella's tuition for a year. She was laughing at something the groom whispered, her head thrown back, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat. Then her eyes snapped open, locking onto Stella across the room. The laughter stopped. A slow, cruel smile curled the bride's lips. She raised a hand, beckoning Stella closer with a sharp, imperious flick of her wrist. Stella moved forward, the blue polyester dress swishing loudly in the sudden lull of conversation. The guests parted, sensing theatre. When Stella reached the edge of the dance floor, Hana turned, the heavy bottle dangling loosely from her fingers. Oh look, Hana slurred, her voice carrying a feigned sweetness that made Stella's stomach turn. The help is finally awake. I thought you were sleeping standing up. Before Stella could bow or apologize, Hana pivoted. Her arm swung out in a clumsy, exaggerated arc. The bottle slipped from her manicured grip. Time seemed to slow down. Stella watched the dark glass tumble through the air, end over end. It hit the pristine white Carrara marble with the sound of a gunshot. Crash! Shards of glass exploded outward, glittering under the chandeliers like diamonds. The dark red wine erupted, splashing across the hem of Hana's white lace gown and pooling on the floor like fresh blood. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Hana looked down at the mess, then at Stella. She didn't look upset about the dress, she looked delighted. Clumsy, Hana whispered, though her hands had been the ones to drop it. She raised her voice, pitching it to the back of the room so every senator, CEO and socialite could hear. Look what you made me do, you distracted me. Stella stood frozen, the metallic smell of the wine filling her nose. Miss Ra, I didn't. Quiet, Hana snapped. She pointed a diamond-clad finger at the jagged mess of glass and wine at her feet. Fix it, now. Stella looked around for a mop, a towel, anything. No, Hana said, stepping closer, her heel crunching on a shard of glass. Not with a mop, with your hands. Get on your knees, Stella, and don't miss a spot. The ballroom had become a coliseum. The air was sucked out of the room, leaving only the heavy metallic scent of spilled Cabernet and the crushing weight of 300 pairs of eyes. Stella stood at the precipice of her dignity. The broken glass glittered like jagged diamonds on the white marble, a trap waiting for her skin. Hana stood above her, a statue of cruel expectation, pointing at the mess with a manicured finger, waiting for the foreign girl to break. Stella looked at the floor, then at the guests who turned away or watched with morbid curiosity. No one moved to help. No one spoke. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders until her knees began to tremble. She calculated the cost of her pride in a split second. If she walked away, the immigration officers would be at her door by morning. If she knelt, she kept her life but lost herself. Stella had two choices, kneel and survive or stand and starve. What would you have done? Comment below. Slowly, agonizingly, she made her choice. Her knees bent. The rustle of the cheap polyester dress was the only sound in the cavernous hall, a noise that seemed to echo like a scream. She lowered herself toward the wine-soaked marble, the damp cold seeping through the thin fabric of the uniform. Hana's smile widened, a victory of malice. Stella reached out with the white cloth, her hand trembling as it hovered over a jagged shard of glass. She closed her eyes, preparing to wipe away the heiress's mess and her own self-respect in one motion. But the cloth never touched the floor. Before her fingers could graze the wine, a shadow fell over her, swallowing the light of the chandelier. A hand shot out, pale, large and veined with power, and clamped around Stella's wrist. It wasn't a gentle touch, it was an iron grip, stopping her movement with absolute finality. The shock of the contact made her gasp. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet instantly. Stella looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't see the ceiling. She saw son Min-Gyu. The dragon of Seoul towered over her, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. He wasn't looking at the bride. He was looking down at Stella, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that stripped the air from her lungs. He didn't speak immediately. He simply held her there, suspended between the floor and freedom, defying the bride, the guests, and the very gravity of the social hierarchy that demanded she kneel. The grip on Stella's wrist didn't loosen. It tightened, anchoring her to the present moment. With a single, fluid motion that defied the tension in the room, son Min-Gyu pulled her upward. He didn't jerk her like a rag doll. He raised her with the deliberate care one might use for a rare artifact, shielding her from the jagged glass and the pooling wine. Stella stumbled, her legs numb from fear, but his other hand was there instantly, settling on the small of her back, a warm, solid weight that burned through the cheap polyester of the uniform. He didn't let go. He kept her standing there, encased in his shadow, creating a physical barrier between the cleaning lady and the bride. The silence in the dynasty hall shifted. It was no longer the silence of awkward voyeurism. It was the suffocating stillness of a prey animal realizing a predator had entered the clearing. Min-Gyu didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply turned his head, his dark eyes sweeping over the frozen crowd, before landing on Hana with the weight of a physical blow. I didn't know the Hana family hired royalty to clean their floors, Min-Gyu said. His voice was a low, terrifying baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. carrying clearly to the back of the room without being raised. It was a voice that signed death warrants in boardrooms, calm and utterly devoid of mercy. Hana's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The insult she had prepared died in her throat. The royalty comment hung in the air, a bizarre, dangerous inversion of the reality she had tried to construct. Min-Gyu ignored the bride's shock. He turned his attention to the groom, who was standing by the head table, pale and sweating in his tuxedo. The young heir looked as though he wanted to disappear into the tablecloth. Min-Gyu took a slow step forward, bringing Stella with him, forcing the room to acknowledge her presence not as a prop, but as an extension of his will. "You borrowed heavily against the future of this estate, didn't you?" Min-Gyu asked, the question rhetorical and sharp as a scalpel. He gestured to Stella, his hand still possessively on her back. "Is this how you treat the valuable assets, by throwing them into the dirt for sport?" The groom stammered, wiping his forehead with a trembling hand. "Director son, it was just a joke, a misunderstanding." "A joke," Min-Gyu repeated, the word tasting like bile. "You think destroying quality is funny. That explains why your stock is plummeting." He looked back at Stella, his gaze softening imperceptibly, though the danger radiating from him remained lethal. "Stand up straight," he murmured for her ears alone. "Do not let them see you shake." Rahana's composure finally fractured. The veins in her neck strained against her diamond necklace as she shrieked, the sound tearing through the elegant silence like a jagged knife. "She is a nobody," Hana screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Stella, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, unvarnished rage. "She is a servant, a dirty, illegal nobody who shouldn't even be breathing the same air as us. How dare you compare her to me?" Min-Gyu didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He waited for the echo of her scream to die down, letting the ugliness of her outburst hang in the air for everyone to process. Then he took a step toward the bride, his presence so overwhelming that Hana actually took a step back, her heel catching on the wet marble she had ordered Stella to clean. "A nobody," Min-Gyu repeated, testing the word on his tongue as if it were a strange, foreign concept. He looked at Stella, who was standing tall despite the trembling in her legs, her eyes dry and defiant. He turned back to the bride, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the chests of the guests. "This nobody has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire lineage, Miss Ra. She cleans your messes without complaint. You create them for sport." The groom stepped forward, looking as if he might vomit. "Director son, please, this is my wedding, we have a contract." Min-Gyu cut him off with a look of absolute boredom. "Do we?" He adjusted his cuffs, the movement precise and terrifying. "I was under the impression that until your father's outstanding loans, the ones secured by this very estate, are repaid to my firm, this venue belongs to me. Technically, you are all trespassing on my property." A collective gasp swept through the room. The dragon didn't just hold their debt, he held the deed. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it evaporated. Hana's face went stark white. She wasn't the queen of the castle, she was a squatter. The guests, sensing the change in ownership, immediately lowered their eyes, terrified of being associated with the debt. Min-Gyu turned his back on the devastating revelation, dismissing the elites as if they were the help. He looked down at Stella, his expression softening from granite to something dangerously attentive. He ignored the sobbing bride and the terrified groom, focusing his entire world on the woman in the cheap blue dress. "I decide who stays on my property and who goes," Min-Gyu said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Offering her a weapon she had never held before, agency. "Do you want to stay here, Stella? Do you want to finish cleaning this floor?" The silence that followed Min-Gyu's question was heavy, but for the first time it didn't weigh on Stella. It weighed on everyone else. She looked down at the grey, damp cleaning rag clutched in her hand, the symbol of her submission, the tool of her invisibility. Then she looked up. She met Rahana's gaze. The bride was no longer a queen. She was just a girl in a ruined dress, shivering with impotent rage and the sudden, terrifying realization that her power was borrowed. Stella looked at the groom, who was staring at his polished shoes, too cowardly to meet the eyes of the woman he had allowed to be abused. Finally, she scanned the room of wealthy guests, the people who had laughed, who had turned away, who had sipped their wine while she knelt in the dirt. They weren't superior. They were just lucky, and luck could run out. Stella didn't bow, she didn't apologize, she simply opened her hand. The wet rag fell through the air, landing with a wet, heavy plait right in the center of the spilled wine. It was an ugly, discordant sight against the pristine marble, a deliberate ruin of the perfect aesthetic Hana had tried so hard to maintain. The red stains spread into the grey fabric, a permanent mark on the wedding of the century. "No," Stella said. The word was quiet, but in the dead silence of the hall it sounded like a gavel striking a desk. "I don't." A slow, dark amusement curled the corner of son Min-Gyu's mouth. He didn't look at the devastation on the floor or the shocked faces of the elite. He only had eyes for the woman who had finally decided to stand. He extended his arm, the movement courtly and respectful, offering her an escape route paved with iron and influence. "Then let us leave this place to those who deserve it," Min-Gyu said. Stella reached out. Her hand, rough from work and still trembling slightly, took his arm. The wool of his suit was warm, a solid anchor in a shifting world. As she stepped to his side, the invisible wall between them vanished. She wasn't walking behind him anymore. She was walking with him. They turned their backs on the bride, the groom, and the debt-ridden estate. As they walked toward the heavy double doors, the sound of their footsteps echoed in unison. Behind them, the facade of the perfect wedding crumbled into hushed whispers and panicked sobbing, but Stella didn't look back. The doors swung open, flooding the hall with the cool night air of Seoul, and for the first time in years she stepped out not as a ghost, but as herself. True worth isn't determined by your title or your bank account, but by the dignity you carry yourself within the face of cruelty. When you finally respect yourself, the world and the right people will respect you too. Don't forget to like, share this video and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts.